She liked you yesterday. She laughed at your jokes. She replied fast. She wanted to see you again. Everything felt easy. Then suddenly, something changed. Her replies got slower. Her energy felt colder. The excitement disappeared. And now you're sitting there wondering what happened. Did you say something wrong? Did she lose interest? Or did something else happen that most men never realize? Here's the uncomfortable truth. Attraction rarely disappears overnight. It fades because of subtle emotional shifts that most people don't notice while they're happening. And once those shifts begin, the dynamic quietly changes. But to understand why this happens, you need to understand something most men are never taught. Attraction is not built on logic. It's built on emotional tension. That tension is what creates curiosity, excitement, and emotional pull. Without tension, attraction slowly turns into comfort, and comfort without tension eventually becomes boredom. Most men believe their job is to remove uncertainty. They try to reassure. They explain their feelings. They show constant interest. They try to make everything safe and predictable. But attraction doesn't grow from predictability. It grows from emotional contrast. Let's break down what actually happens in the early stages of attraction. When a woman first meets a man she finds interesting, there is curiosity. She doesn't know everything about him yet. She doesn't know exactly how he feels. She doesn't know what will happen next. That uncertainty creates intrigue. Intrigue triggers emotional engagement. Her brain starts asking questions. Why is he different? What is he thinking? Where is this going? Those questions create emotional investment. But then something subtle happens. Many men become too eager to remove the mystery. They start over-explaining. They text constantly. They make themselves completely predictable. Instead of creating intrigue, they remove it. Instead of emotional tension, they create emotional certainty. And certainty sounds good in theory. But in attraction, certainty too early can quietly weaken desire. Because curiosity disappears. And curiosity is one of the strongest psychological drivers of attraction. Now let's talk about something even more important. Emotional polarity. Polarity is the dynamic tension between two different energies, masculine and feminine, confidence and curiosity, stability and intrigue. When polarity exists, attraction feels alive. When polarity disappears, interactions feel flat. One of the fastest ways polarity disappears is through over-validation. Over-validation happens when a man constantly proves his interest. He compliments excessively. He reassures constantly. He makes it very clear that she has already won him. And once that happens, the dynamic shifts. Instead of wondering if she has your attention, she becomes certain she already has it. The chase disappears. The curiosity disappears. And slowly the attraction begins to cool. But this doesn't mean women enjoy uncertainty in a manipulative way. It simply means the human brain values discovery. People are naturally drawn towards what they are still learning about, not what they have already fully understood. This is why mystery plays such a powerful role in attraction. Mystery keeps the emotional experience dynamic. It keeps people engaged. It keeps curiosity alive. The Stoics understood something similar thousands of years ago. They believed emotional discipline was a form of strength, not suppressing emotions, but controlling how and when you express them. Someone who reveals everything immediately removes depth from interaction, but someone who expresses themselves gradually creates intrigue. Now let's talk about emotional stability, because this is another reason attraction can disappear suddenly. When a man becomes emotionally reactive, the dynamic changes. If a text reply takes longer than expected, he becomes anxious. If plans change, he becomes frustrated. If attention shifts slightly, he begins overthinking. That emotional reactivity signals insecurity, and insecurity quietly weakens attraction. Because attraction often grows when someone appears emotionally grounded, someone who can handle uncertainty without panic, someone who doesn't lose composure when things feel unclear. The The Stoics believe that true strength comes from emotional control, the ability to remain calm regardless of external circumstances. When someone carries that kind of stability, people feel safe around them. Safety allows attraction to grow, but emotional dependence creates pressure, and pressure weakens desire. This is why women sometimes appear to lose attraction suddenly. Not because something dramatic happened, but because the emotional dynamic slowly changed. The mystery faded, the tension disappeared, the polarity weakened, and what once felt exciting started to feel predictable. Predictability may create comfort, but comfort alone does not sustain attraction. Attraction thrives on emotional engagement, curiosity, discovery, contrast. Without those elements, the experience becomes flat. And once the emotional energy becomes flat, attraction begins to fade. But here's the important part. This process is usually subconscious. Women rarely sit down and analyze these changes logically. They simply feel the shift. They feel less excited, less curious, less emotionally pulled toward the connection. And when those feelings fade, attraction fades with them. But understanding this psychology changes everything, because it reveals that attraction is not random. It is shaped by emotional signals, signals that most people never realize they are sending. In the next part, we'll go deeper into the hidden psychological mistakes that quietly destroy attraction without most men ever realizing it. Because sometimes the very things you think are helping the connection are the exact things that are slowly killing it. To understand why attraction fades, you have to look at what happens after the first phase of excitement. Because the beginning of attraction almost always feels effortless. The conversations flow naturally. The energy feels mutual. There is curiosity on both sides. But as time passes, something subtle begins to shift. The man often becomes more invested. Not in a bad way, but in a way that slowly changes the emotional dynamic. He starts thinking about her more. He prioritizes her attention more. He begins to organize his time around the connection. At first, this feels normal. After all, when you like someone, you naturally want to spend more time with them. But the way that interest is expressed can quietly transform the entire relationship dynamic. One of the most common patterns is overavailability. When someone becomes too available too quickly, their value changes in the eyes of the other person. Not because they are less valuable, but because human psychology interprets constant availability as certainty, and certainty removes emotional tension. Think about the beginning again. In the early stage, she didn't know exactly how you felt. She didn't know if you were fully invested yet. She didn't know how things would unfold. That uncertainty created curiosity. Curiosity created emotional engagement. But when a man becomes extremely available, the uncertainty disappears. Now she knows exactly where she stands. She knows she has your attention. And when the emotional puzzle is solved too quickly, the brain loses interest in solving it. This doesn't mean women enjoy games. It means humans are wired for discovery. Discovery creates excitement, and excitement fuels attraction. When discovery ends, the emotional experience becomes predictable. Predictability can feel comfortable, but comfort alone does not sustain attraction. Another hidden mistake is emotional over-explaining. Many men believe that being emotionally open will strengthen the connection. They explain exactly how they feel. They describe their intentions. They remove every possible doubt. And while honesty is important in relationships, too much emotional clarity too early can remove the natural process of emotional discovery. The brain enjoys piecing things together slowly. When everything is explained immediately, the emotional journey becomes shorter. And when the emotional journey becomes shorter, the intensity of attraction often weakens. The Stoics understood something very powerful about emotional expression. They believed emotions should be experienced fully, but expressed with discipline. Not hidden, but not poured out all at once either. Gradual emotional expression creates depth. Depth creates intrigue, and intrigue keeps attraction alive. Now let's talk about another psychological factor that often destroys attraction without people realizing it. Approval-seeking behavior. Approval-seeking happens when someone constantly tries to secure validation. They ask for reassurance. They seek constant confirmation that the other person still likes them. They become highly sensitive to small shifts in attention. This behavior often appears after attraction has already started. Because once someone becomes emotionally invested, they become afraid of losing the connection. And that fear begins to shape their behavior. But attraction thrives in emotional confidence, not emotional dependence. When someone constantly seeks reassurance, it signals insecurity. And insecurity creates emotional pressure. Pressure weakens attraction. Because attraction grows best in an atmosphere of freedom. Two people choosing each other, not one person trying to secure the other. This is where emotional stability becomes incredibly important. A man who remains emotionally stable during uncertainty creates a very different dynamic. He does not panic when communication slows down. He does not assume the worst when plans change. He does not chase reassurance. Instead, he remains centered. This calmness communicates something powerful. Self-confidence. Not loud confidence. Not arrogance. But quiet emotional security. The Stoics called this inner stability. A state where your emotions are not controlled by external events. When someone carries that stability, people naturally feel drawn to them. Because emotional stability creates a sense of safety. And safety allows attraction to grow deeper. But there is another psychological trigger most people ignore. Scarcity. Scarcity is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. People naturally value what feels limited. If something is always available, the brain subconsciously interprets it as less valuable. But when something appears rare, attention increases. This principle exists everywhere in human behavior. Luxury brands, limited experiences, exclusive opportunities. And the same psychology applies to attraction. When someone has their own life, their own priorities, and their own goals, their attention becomes valuable. Not because they are withholding it intentionally, but because it is not unlimited. Purpose creates scarcity, and purpose is incredibly attractive. A person who is focused on their own growth, work, and ambitions naturally carries a different energy. They are not constantly chasing attention. They are building something. That direction makes them intriguing because their life has momentum. Momentum signals independence, and independence creates attraction. Now consider the opposite situation. When someone abandons their own priorities to focus entirely on a relationship dynamic, the energy changes. Instead of appearing independent, they appear dependent. And emotional dependence often weakens attraction. Not because dependence is morally wrong, but because attraction responds to strength and self-direction. When someone is deeply engaged with their own life, their presence feels more valuable because their attention is a choice, not a need. This subtle shift changes everything. Instead of chasing attraction, they become someone others want to pursue. Understanding these psychological dynamics reveals something important. Attraction is rarely lost in a single dramatic moment. It fades through small behavioral patterns: overavailability, overvalidation, emotional dependence, loss of mystery, loss of tension. Each of these shifts slowly changes the emotional dynamic until eventually the excitement disappears. And when excitement disappears, attraction often follows. But understanding this psychology allows you to recognize these patterns before they destroy the connection. Because attraction is not something random. It is shaped by emotional signals, signals that people send constantly without realizing it. And once you begin recognizing these signals, the entire process of attraction becomes much clearer. In the final part, we'll explore the deeper psychological principle that ultimately determines whether attraction continues to grow or quietly disappears. Because the most powerful force behind attraction is not appearance. It is something much deeper. Something that determines how people perceive your value without a single word being spoken. At this point, the pattern becomes clear. Women rarely wake up one morning and suddenly decide to lose attraction. What usually happens is much quieter. The emotional tension that once existed slowly disappears. Mystery turns into predictability. Curiosity turns into certainty. And emotional excitement turns into comfort. But comfort alone cannot sustain attraction. The Stoics believe that true strength comes from self-mastery, not chasing approval, not reacting to every emotional shift, but remaining grounded in your own direction. A man who has purpose, emotional stability, and self-respect naturally creates intrigue, because his attention is not something that can be easily taken for granted. And that is the real lesson most men never hear. Attraction is not sustained by trying harder. It is sustained by maintaining mystery, emotional balance, and self-respect. When those elements exist, attraction continues to grow. But when they disappear, attraction quietly fades. If this made you rethink modern dating, tell me in the comments. Have you ever experienced someone losing attraction suddenly without understanding why? And if you want more deep insights into psychology, Stoicism, and modern relationships, subscribe. Because the real psychology of attraction is rarely taught. But once you understand it, you begin to see it everywhere.